What if everything you've been told about the soul is slightly wrong? Not wrong in a religious sense, and not wrong in a scientific sense. Wrong in a more fundamental way. Wrong about what the soul actually is. Most of us grew up with one of two ideas about the soul. Either it is a small glowing thing inside us floating around like a balloon waiting to leave when we die, or it doesn't exist at all, and we are nothing more than neurons firing in the dark. But there is a third option, and comes from a Greek philosopher and teacher named Georgios Dragonas. Dragonas is older now, but at the height of his work, he ran a school in Athens, the School of the Philosophy of Being. I first met him as a child. He used to visit the family of my first girlfriend, a family that became over many years like my own. And he would sit there for hours on end talking. They had deep conversations that seemed to have no end. The kind of conversations that were starting in the morning, all the way through the night, and still they were not finished. And we were young, we were very young, and we were not really listening, or at least we thought we were not listening. But something was being absorbed. Something was entering through the background, through the air of those evenings, without us even knowing it. And looking back at it now, I think he was one of those people who exist in the margins of your childhood for a reason, not by accident. Gurdjieff had a concept he called the magnetic center, the idea that certain people and certain situations appear in our lives not randomly, but as foundations for our development. Seeds that are planted before we are ready to receive them. Dragonas was probably that for me. And now, years later, I find myself returning to those ideas, not as the child half listening in the room, but as someone who wants to understand them fully. On my Greek channel, I upload his original lectures. I restore them because the original recordings are VHS, they're very rough in sound and image from the 80s. But for the English channel, I decided to do something different. Rather than simply subtitling the lectures, I wanted to bring his ideas across in a way that could breathe in another language, in another context. It is actually quite difficult to subtitle his lectures. So that is what this is, not a translation, it is an interpretation. So today I want to share some of his ideas with you, not as a lecture, as a conversation, so to speak. The problem with science. Dragonas begins his 1980s lecture with an uncomfortable observation. Science has given us extraordinary tools, but when it comes to the inner life, to the question of why we suffer, why we feel empty, why meaning seems to slip through our own fingers, science falls short. And this happens not because the scientists are unintelligent, but because they are using the wrong instrument. And he traces this back to the scientific materialism of the 19th century. Once we decided that only measurable things are real, what we did is that we locked ourselves out of half of our own existence. And he sees something else happening in that history, something more deliberate. He notices a slow consolidation of power, a gradual effort to make one way of knowing the only legitimate way of knowing. Scientific materialism, he argues, is very easy to control. You can regulate it, institutionalize it, own it. The other kind of knowing, the inner kind, cannot be controlled. And neither can art. You cannot control a Mozart, and you cannot legislate a Turner. A poet can quietly overturn an entire worldview without even knowing it. And he gives a remarkable example. A revolution that nobody recognized it as it was happening. It began, he says, with Turner in England, an explosion of color that broke all the rules of painting, and it continued on a musical level with Debussy in France. And slowly, invisibly, these artistic upheavals transformed the consciousness of entire societies. He sees art not as decoration, but as the very immune system of human consciousness. When institutions try to control what is true, art sneaks the real truth in through the side door. What is the soul? So what is the soul? Dragonas is unusually precise here for someone speaking about mystical subjects. He is, as he himself says, deeply rational. Logic is his very foundation, even when the very destination is transcendence. He begins by separating two things we usually confuse: personality and soul. Personality, he says, is the relationship of the body with itself. It includes the physical body, the emotions, and the thinking mind, all interacting in a closed loop. And this is the I, the ego, the self we see in the mirror. You can measure it, analyze it psychologically, see its traumas and its gifts. But the soul is something different. The soul is what happens when all of that, body, emotion, mind, enters into a relationship with the world, with the universe. Not a belief in the universe, not a hope, a relationship, an active, living connection. And this distinction changes everything. Because if the soul is a relationship, then it is not something you own. You cannot possess a relationship, you can only participate in one. He uses the image of a business partnership. You bring the capital of your personality, your body, your experiences. The universe brings the capital of life, of breath, of intelligence. That partnership is the soul. And like any partnership, it has two poles. One pole belongs to you, the other belongs to the universe, to the divine. Which means your soul is not entirely yours. It never was. It is a co-creation. If you refuse to be a good partner, if you collapse inward into yourself, treating your ego as the whole story, the soul begins to wither. The other pole stops feeding it. It is starved of its other half. And when the relationship is open, when the connection flows freely, the energy moves in both directions. This is why he says you see people who are old or ill and yet carry an extraordinary inner power. Not because of their body, because their relationship with the whole is unbroken. And this, he says, is why people who have everything can feel such profound emptiness. The ego can accumulate endlessly, but the soul cannot be fed by accumulation, it can only be fed by connection. Energy and the astral level. Here, Dragonas introduces something that many traditions have described but few have explained with such clarity. He calls it the energetic or astral level of our being. This is the layer that carries our emotions, the part of us that is directly affected by our relationship with everything around us, and can be exhausted in ways the body cannot. Have you ever slept 10 hours and woken up completely empty? Not just physically tired, but hollow, drained in a way that sleep cannot fix at all. This is psychic exhaustion, and it happens when we close the channel, when we contract into the small ego, when we stop giving, stop creating, stop loving. The universe cannot reach us, and we wake up empty. But when we open, when we create something beautiful, when we help someone without expecting anything in return, the recharge is instant. The energy flows, the energy flows the moment the channel opens. And the blockages, the unresolved fears, the unexpressed love, the suppressed creativity, don't just stay in the mind. Over time, they descend into the body. They become physical. They become illness. This, he argues, is not a metaphor. It is a mechanism. 3 levels of consciousness. Dragonas describes consciousness in 3 distinct levels. And understanding all 3 is essential to understand where we are and where we are going. Level 1. The animal. Animals are what he calls unconscious but perfect. A cat does not wonder whether it is being a good cat. It has no existential dread. It lives in complete alignment with its nature. Its instincts are infallible. But it has no awareness of that alignment. It is one with the whole, but it doesn't even know it. Level 2. The human. We are conscious, but imperfect. And this is both our tragedy and our glory. We know we exist. We reflect on ourselves. We feel the gap between who we are and who we could be. And the gap is the source of our pain. But it is also the source of our dignity. Because pain is the price of consciousness, and consciousness is the path forward. This in-between state, knowing enough to suffer, but not yet enough to be free, is what he calls the inner hell. And this is not a punishment, it is just a necessary stage. Level 3, the divine. This is what he calls superconscious and perfect. The animal's unity with the whole, but with full awareness. The perfection of nature known from the inside. The human being, he says, is the bridge between these two. We suffer because we are in the middle, caught between our material imperfection and our spiritual potential. So, we are not a mistake, we are a threshold. The soul as partnership with the universe. Let's go a bit deeper into what this partnership actually means, because Dragonas is very specific. He says, you cannot own the soul. If you begin to believe it belongs entirely to you, you start to limit it. You close it inside the narrow borders of the ego, and then the soul stops breathing, because the soul feeds on the whole. If you have no contact with the whole, your soul starves. This is why egocentric people, no matter how much wealth or success they accumulate, feel an emptiness they cannot explain. That emptiness is not psychological, it is the absence of nourishment from the other partner. But the person who understands that they are part of a larger design begins to receive energy. The soul then becomes the conductor through which the universe expresses itself. When you create something beautiful, when you help someone without any expectation of return, it is not only you doing it, it is the partnership functioning. And your soul shines because it is fulfilling its purpose. To connect the small with the large and the temporary with the eternal. That connection is what gives us the sense of meaning in our lives. What is truly immortal? So what survives? If the soul is a relationship, what part of that relationship continues after the body ends? And Dragonas' answer is precise. The body decays, daily memories fade, but certain things are not subject to time. The ideas, the values, and the virtues. When you cultivate truth, when you practice beauty, justice, compassion, these are not personal inventions. They are eternal qualities of the universe itself. And if you have aligned your existence with them, something of you becomes woven into the permanent fabric of things. Immortality, he says, is not a gift. It is something built, choice by choice, act by act, relationship by relationship. It is built by choosing not to spend your life only on what is temporary and material, but by making room for what he calls being. Being has no expiration date. If the soul has learned to resonate at the frequencies of being, it's simply the removal of a garment that is no longer needed. The essence of the relationship remains, because it is now interwoven with the eternal. The nature of reality. Here Dragonas asks the question, what is real? Shakespeare said it with devastating simplicity. We are made of the stuff of dreams. This is not only poetry, it is a deep ontological truth. If you examine matter, if you follow it all the way down, you find nothing is truly solid. There is only energy and emptiness. The reality we perceive through our senses is a kind of projection, like a film playing on the screen of our minds. The soul, he says, is the one that watches the film. Think about dreams. When we dream, the dream is our absolute reality. We feel pain in it, joy, fear, and when we wake up, we say, oh, it was only a dream. But who guarantees that this life is not also a kind of a waking dream? The soul is the only stable reference point that can pass from one state to another. This is why understanding the soul helps us not cling too desperately to material forms. Forms change, they are born and then they die. But the substance from which they are made, this universal consciousness, is always there. Immortality lies in realizing that we are the dreamer, not the dream. Parallel dimensions and consciousness. This leads to a conclusion that may seem strange at first but becomes almost obvious once you follow the logic. Consciousness is not limited to one space or one dimension. Think of it as a traveler who moves between environments. When the focus of our attention shifts, the world we experience as real shifts with it. There are parallel states of existence happening simultaneously, but we only perceive the one to which we are tuned. It is like a radio. Every station broadcasts at the same time, but you only hear the one you have dialed to. The soul has the ability to change the dial. When we shift our level of consciousness through deep meditation, through certain profound experiences, or through what we call death, we are simply changing frequency. We do not cease to exist. We begin to operate by different laws. In another dimension, time may not be linear. Space may not be a barrier. The soul is the carrier that allows this movement. And this is why it matters so much to train the soul while we are here, so that it can move with ease and awareness in whatever environment it finds itself. Reincarnation and evolution. When Dragonas speaks of reincarnation, he's not describing punishment, he's not describing mere repetition, he's describing a process of evolution. The soul comes back and comes back again because it needs to gather experience from different angles of existence. It is like an actor who plays many roles in order to finally understand what it means to be human. The problem begins when we identify too completely with the story of this particular I, with its traumas, its successes, and its identity. That attachment to the ego's story is what keeps us bound. Evolution requires the transcendence of that story. We must learn to let go of the old garment, the old habits, the old patterns of thought. Each new incarnation is an opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past and add a new quality to our relationship with the whole. It is not a linear journey, it is a spiral. We rise through levels, and each time we return, we have the possibility of seeing from a higher vantage point. And the goal is not simply to live again. The goal is to wake up within life and to realize our eternal nature while we are still here. The planet as a living organism. Here Dragonas expands the vision outward, far beyond the individual. We are not the only ones with a soul. The Earth itself, the planet we live on, is not a dead rock that happens to host life. It is a living organism, an entity with its own consciousness and its own purpose. We as humans are part of that organism, the way cells are part of our own body. And what is our role within it? We are, he says, the nervous system of the planet. We are the organ through which the Earth can achieve self-awareness. When a human being contemplates, when an artist creates, it is the planet itself that contemplates, that creates through them. There is an interdependence here that we have forgotten. When we harm the planet, we harm ourselves, not only materially, but psychically. The crisis we see around us is at its root a crisis of relationship. We have broken the partnership with the Earth. The concept he invokes here is ancient, the Anima Mundi, the soul of the world. Our individual soul is connected to it. We are cells of a larger being. And only when we understand that, only when we act with that awareness, we can find our true place and move with responsibility and love. Death as a constituent of life. We need to understand something fundamental. There is no real separation in the essence of things, not in the macrocosm, not in the microcosm. In the material world, things appear separate because of space and time, but within the unity of being, everything is in direct and necessary relationship. There is a continuous flow, a flow made of opposites that constantly produce new results. Death, decay, the changing of forms, these are not the end. They are components of this flow. When something leaves, when it disappears from our sight, it becomes energy. And then it returns and moves in cycles. These cycles of energy and motion are what constitute life itself. We should not fear what constitutes us. The departure from one form is simply the transition to another state within the same unbroken unity. If we see the universe through a clear, conscious lens, we understand that nothing is truly lost. Only the frequency changes. Only our reference point shifts. What happens after the body? Here we have a crucial question. What becomes of our individuality? When the body ceases to function, does the soul simply dissolve into chaos? No, he says. Individuality, as a quality of consciousness, remains. It is like the imprint left by a journey through time. That imprint transfers to another level of existence, where the laws of matter no longer apply, but the laws of consciousness do. The journey of the soul after the body is a process of clarification. Everything that was unnecessary, everything that belonged only to the material needs and fears of the ego, begins to fall away. What remains is the pure essence of our experiences. If in this life we cultivated love, care, and knowledge, these are the provisions we take with us. Individuality then is no longer a limitation. It becomes the unique way in which the universe expressed itself through us. And death is not a fall into emptiness. It is a transition into a more expanded state of consciousness. There the soul reviews its journey and prepares for the next stage. Individuality persists as long as there is a purpose to its evolution. Only when the soul reaches full identification with being does the need for separate individuality recede, giving way to absolute unity. Time is being. Here Dragonas arrives at something that sounds like philosophy, but it is rooted in direct experience. He calls it time is being. And this is not a poetic phrase, it is an equation. Think about thought itself. In a single moment, in zero time, the mind can travel across all of history. It can reach back thousands of years or leap forward into an imagined future. You can sit perfectly still and contain within your mind the entire span of the universe. This means that thought has the same properties as space and time. It is boundless and it is eternal. And if that is true, then time is not a container that holds consciousness. Time is consciousness. Thought, time, and space are not three separate things. They are one thing, seen from different angles. There is no thought that does not contain time. Even the shortest word, even a single syllable, occupies a span in the mind and a duration in its expression. The world and the thought that interprets it are made of the same substance. Mind is being, heart is being, and time is being. Whether we say the mind is existence or the heart is existence, we are pointing to the same indivisible unity. And this, he says, is not a theory. It is something you can verify in your own experience right now, in this very moment of listening. The zero and the infinite. From here, Dragonas moves into territory that language can barely hold. When consciousness approaches pure unity, when it moves toward the Absolute One, something paradoxical happens. Zero and infinity coincide. Think about this carefully. Something that is everything has nothing to compare itself to. Something that is nothing has no boundary that defines it. At the extreme, they are the same. He puts it this way. When the one is all things, neither the one nor the all retains its meaning. Each cancels the other out. This is not nihilism, this is the deepest freedom. Because what remains when all definitions collapse is pure, unconditioned presence. And he invokes Archimedes, who said, Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world. But in absolute unity, there is no place to stand outside it. There is no fixed point from which to compare. And so every definition dissolves. You are and you are not. You are infinite and you are finite. You are bound and you are free, simultaneously. Movement and stillness become identical. The infinite and the zero become identical. This is the experiential confirmation of what he has been building toward. That in absolute unity, all opposites do not cancel each other out. They become one and the same. Theosis versus Enlightenment. Here's where Dragonas parts ways with many Eastern traditions. In Buddhism and Vedanta, the goal is often described as enlightenment, the mind perceiving the truth, seeing the light. But Dragonas draws from the Greek concept of theosis, deification, and gives it a philosophical, non-dogmatic meaning. Enlightenment, he says, still preserves a distance. There is still a seer and a seen. You perceive unity, but you still perceive it from the outside. Theosis is something beyond that. It is the final identification of the being with being itself. It is the moment when the drop returns to the ocean and realizes it was never anything other than the ocean. This is not the loss of the self, it is the discovery of the real self. In that state, duality collapses. There is no longer me and the universe, there is only presence. The consciousness is no longer unconscious but perfect like the animal, nor conscious but imperfect like the human. It becomes superconscious and perfect. The state of the God-human, where full awareness meets absolute unity. The Trinity and the universe. Before we close, Dragonas offers us one more insight, one that reframes something very familiar. The concept of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is usually approached as a religious doctrine. But Dragonas reads it philosophically, as a description of three fundamental principles that govern all of creation. The Father is not an old man in the sky. The Father is the primordial cause, the undifferentiated unity, the pure potential before all things. The Son is the Logos, the manifestation of that potential in time and space. It is the principle of form and consciousness that incarnates in order to know itself. And the Holy Spirit is the connecting force, the energy that allows the source and the expression to remain one. It is the movement that bridges the infinite and the finite. The critique he offers is not of the Trinity itself, but of how it has been presented. When we reduce these three principles to human figures, we cut them off from the living reality of the universe. But when we understand that these three forces operate in every cell, in every thought, in every galaxy, the Trinity ceases to be a doctrine to be believed and becomes a truth to be lived. Dialectics and qualitative evolution. The method Dragonas uses is what the Greeks called dialectics, not just the presentation of arguments, but the art of uncovering truth through the synthesis of opposites. It is the tool that allows us to rise from mere information to knowledge and finally to wisdom. And the evolution he points toward is not how much information we absorb, it's not about how much we learn or how much we accumulate. It is purely qualitative. Qualitative evolution means a change in the level of consciousness itself. It It means being able to see the world no longer as a collection of separate objects, but as an unbroken unity of meaning. The goal of this is the awakening of the being within being. When the quality of our existence changes, the reality we experience changes with it. Dialectics, he says, show us the path. We don't need to fear the contradictions of life. We need to use them as steps to reach the transcendence that lies beyond them. This is the challenge for the modern human being. To move from surface existence to essential being, recognizing oneself as a co-creator of the universal harmony. What Dragonas is really doing, beneath all the philosophy, beneath all the ideas about soul and consciousness and being, is bringing us back to the way the ancient Greeks understood reality. A world where life is not a burden, where depression is not the default state, where you don't have to spend your years chasing the wrong things, money, status and career, the image you project to others. None of that in the end means anything. And I don't say that as a cliché. I say it in the way Dragonas would say it, as a precise observation. Think of it like a game of Monopoly. You play, you accumulate, some people win, some people lose. And then the game ends and everything goes back in the box. Every hotel, every banknote, every property, back in the box. So the real question is not how much did you accumulate while you were playing. The real question is, when it all goes back in the box, what remains? Because something does remain, and that something, that is where the real game begins. And that is where Dragonas has literally spent his life pointing, not toward what we can get, but toward what we already are, beneath everything we've been told to chase. Philosophy is the study of death. That is what Socrates said. And he didn't say this as a morbid observation, but as a precise description of the philosophical life. To philosophize is to practice daily the release of everything that does not last, the attachments, the identities, the accumulated stories of the ego. To live already now from the place that remains when all of that is stripped away. And Heraclitus gives us the other half. Ethos, anthropo, daemon. Character is destiny. Not fate imposed from somewhere outside, not from fortune, not from circumstance. What you are at the level of soul is what you will meet. Put these two together and the entire teaching of this video collapses into a single point. What you build in yourself now is what survives. And there is one more word that seals this completely. In the Cratylus, Socrates traces the word dikeon, justice, to its root. Dion, that which moves through everything. Diakeon, that which burns through everything, that which penetrates all things, and that which purifies all things by fire. And Heraclitus seals this by saying, Πάντα ιακίζει κεραυνός. The thunderbolt steers all things. The same principle, three expressions. It moves through everything, it burns through everything, it governs everything. Justice is not a moral rule. It is not a legal system. It is the name for the force that runs through all of existence, consuming what is false, sustaining what is real, and steering everything toward its destination. The same fire Heraclitus saw at the heart of the cosmos, the same logos that orders the flags, the same nous that Anaxagoras said underlies all things, the same being that Dragonas has spent his life pointing toward. So here at the end, the whole thing resolves. Practice, the release of what does not last. That is philosophy. Build the character that is your destiny. That is Heraclitus. Align yourself with what moves through everything, burns through everything, governs everything. That is justice. That is the soul in its right relationship with the cosmos. And that is exactly what the Greeks called the good life. And now one last thing before we close. You might think the Trinity, Father, Son and Holy Spirit, is a Christian invention. It is not. The triadic structure is as old as human thought itself. The Pythagoreans saw it in number, the monad, the dyad, the triad, the one generating the two generating the three, and the three generating all things, all multiplicity. Plato saw it in the cosmos, nous, soul, body, the eternal, the intermediary, the material. And we also see it in the gods, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. Three brothers ruling three realms, sky, sea, and the underworld, heaven, earth, and what lies beneath. The Fates, also three, Clotho, who spins the thread of life, Lachesis, who measures it, Atropos, who cuts it. Birth, duration, death, beginning, middle, and end. The Egyptians saw it in Osiris, Isis, and Horus. The Indians saw it in Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Creation, preservation, destruction. Every culture, every tradition, independently, again and again. Because the Trinity is not a doctrine, it is the structure of reality itself, recognized by every civilization that looked deeply enough. The one that differentiates into two in order to know itself, and the relationship between them, that is the three. Being, expression, connection. Father, Logos, Spirit. Unconscious perfection, conscious imperfection, superconscious perfection. It was never invented, it was always there, waiting to be seen,